Jamuted, chat. How y'all doing? Is this too bright? Or is it me? Is that better? Nah. Maybe I'll do this. Nope. No lights? No lights? Is that better? That seems better. I try to. Bleme ugh hern. So recently I've just been doing like I try to do like some exercise. I don't like work out. So yesterday I did like, so I haven't exercised in a while, so I did like 40 jumping jacks, 20 push-ups, plank for like 40 seconds, 20 squats, 20 lunges. Just like do something. Have I eaten breakfast after a fashion? I had my green juice, which is blended spinach, kale, broccoli, turmeric, ginger, some banana, maybe some grapes. No mint today. You blend that up, and then I add water to it, or sometimes coconut water. It doesn't taste very good, but it's like 3 servings of like fruits and vegetables and gets a lot of, you know, your strong micronutrients, anti-inflammatories, all that good stuff. Salam Amir Huda. Try oat milk instead. I love oat milk. The problem is that I may be allergic to some of the oil that they put in oat milk. Anyway, welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alo Kanoja. Just a reminder that although I'm a psychiatrist, nothing we discussed on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is for entertainment and educational purposes only. If y'all have a concern or question, please go see a licensed professional. So, yeah, going back to... So we're not doing anything today, chat. Okay? We're not doing anything. We're not teaching y'all about trauma. We're not talking about we're just chilling. So like if y'all want to, like, we're just gonna have we're just gonna hang out. So it's, you know, 2022 is rolling to an end, and you know, so we're just gonna hang out. So like if y'all are, I mean, if you have questions and stuff, you're more than welcome to ask them. I think Ruthie's gonna come hang out in a little bit. So if y'all like have questions, that's totally fine. But you know, we're going to pretend like back in the days when we were a small stream and we had like 30 viewers. Maybe we have 30 viewers now. Who knows? We're just going to talk a little bit about, you know, what 2022 was like, whatever you want to talk. I have played Ender Lilies. Pretty big fan, actually. Something about the game started to get boring towards the end. I haven't finished it. But I really liked... on paper, the game is like really, really, really good. Something about just the gameplay itself I thought was a little bit not quite as fun towards the end. What was your favorite 2022 video game? So like the game that I played in 2022 or that came out in 2022? Okay, so I have played Hollow Knight, obviously. Inscription, I loved as far as I can tell, the first half. I didn't finish it. What mental illnesses do Tinker players have? That's such a good question. I'd probably say they're probably sadists, right? Because they want to make the world a terrible place for other people.
Hi, honey.
Hi.
You have water?
I have water.
Do I need to get a chair?
I can get you a chair if you want, or you can get a chair.
I find getting a chair very challenging.
I know, it's hard to pick up a chair, isn't it? Why don't you come sit here? I will get you a chair. Hold on 1 second. I have to go get a chair.
You don't have to.
I know.
I can. I just don't want to. Hi. How are you guys? Congratulations, M-Tree, when you find your hair tie. That is it's a whole different day. Oh, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Y'all are so nice. Thank you. You make that look easy, Olive.
It is easy. It's a very light chair.
Thanks, guys.
Now I'm all...
Now
My
you're all
face is-
small.
My face is low. Maybe I should I get a bigger chair?
No, I'll just come down.
But now we're both small.
Small.
And the camera's not centered. We're short kings. Let me get a different chair. You can put that back up.
Okay.
Or I wonder if I should.
Are you gonna sit on a pillow?
I'm going to sit on a booster seat. I'm going to have a booster seat.
Is that working?
Yeah, I'm going to sit. I'll just adopt Padmasan and we'll be fine.
You know, presidents do that.
Do what?
They get little boosters so they look taller on the podium and they look taller in their chairs.
On the podium, but aren't you standing in the podium?
Yeah, but they get like a little step stool.
Why wouldn't they just lower the podium? Or is the podium raised?
Because they don't want a long torso. They want to be taller.
A long torso.
Yeah, if they just lower the podium, then it just looks like you see a lot more chest. Anyway, I guess. I don't know.
We were talking about games.
What kind of games?
So I was so the game that so Elden Ring was fantastic. Was Hades 2022? I feel like Hades was 2021. No.
It's been a blurry year.
Yeah, but I think recently the game that has Hades was not 22. Yeah, it's been a while. No, the mug is not massive. It's just she's on a stepping stool, so it looks big. It's a normal sized mug.
Props. It's so that my head looks smaller. See, look.
Yeah, it's they use the shrinking ray on the head. I am excited about Hades 2, though.
What's the game that you're playing that the kids really like playing with you?
So that game is epic. So I started finally the Trails series. So I started Trails of Cold Steel, and I just finished Trails of Cold Steel 1. It was absolutely amazing. It's really good.
What's the monster that the kids like?
I don't know that there's a particular monster they like in the game. And then the other thing is I started playing Smash Brothers with my kids, and I've never really played Smash, but they both really love it. And so that's like a thing that we do now.
Yeah. Little Smash babies.
Yeah. Any advice on dating a med student? I'll let Ruthie handle that one because she's the one who's dated a med student.
Make sure you have your own hobbies because you're going to be on your own quite a lot. And get ready for some like boring dinners where they just talk about the hospital.
I wonder if you need to move closer.
Okay.
This seems to not be picking up very much, but it's jacked to the max.
Jack.
Because I usually am closer. But is this too quiet, chat?
You can hear?
Okay.
Okay,
great.
Thanks, guys. But yeah, have your own hobbies and just prepare yourself for a lot of boring conversations. And also bring in your non-medical friends to keep it fun. But then, you know, in 4 or 6 years, it'll be really fun. So make sure you're in it for the long haul. Yeah, I think so.
You thought it was fun, second year of residency?
Yeah, that's when we had our kid. That's when, like, I don't know, resident friends are cooler than med school friends because med school is so competitive, right? Like, y'all are all friends, but not, like, really friends. And in residency, y'all are all, like, in it together. I loved them all, but, you know, the residency friends are different.
It's possible that I was just lamer in med school, and therefore I attracted a lamer crowd, and I was cooler in residency, and therefore attracted a cooler crowd.
You were not your final form in medical school.
It was still evolving.
Yeah.
I was not a basic Pokemon, but was a middle tier Pokemon. So what do you think? What do you two think about having a room for each own in a relationship?
Each have your own room.
Interesting.
I mean, I know married couples that have that, but not necessarily their own bedrooms. It's more like, here's my hobby space and here's my hobby space, like their own offices and stuff like that. I can see having your own space. But I don't know. I feel bad for, I don't know. I like sharing a bedroom.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think people should do what works for them. And I think that, you know, for example, if like one person snores a lot, it can be understandable that sometimes you sleep in a different room.
Separate pizzas are a-okay.
Yeah, or you can do half and half, right? You can do like, you can be one of those people that's like, can we get this one on half and this one on half? Vendita is saying how to deal with a breakup.
Ooh,
I don't know.
need some details. We've never, in all of our years together, have like banished anyone to the couch, right? We've never done that.
I think we try to not go to bed angry with each other, right? That's
Yeah.
it's one of our main rules.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that the conflict has to be resolved at that point. You just
Yeah. No angers. How to break up? Ooh.
It's a good question. I wouldn't know. I've never broken up with anyone.
Well, I'm not going to tell you now. I don't know. I mean, breaking up with somebody is, I don't know, like once your mind is made up here, like there's kind of no point in pretending with the relationship anymore. So I think it's Band-Aid. You just gotta rip it off. I think a little bit on what kind of relationship you want to have after. Like if you just don't want to see each other or talk to each other, y'all need your space, then like just kind of go into it knowing how it's going to end. Any thoughts on Andrew Tate?
So we try not to talk about people, right? Like, I mean, sometimes we'll like comment about people, but that's not what we're about. So I think that like, it's really easy to talk about people. But I think one of the things that we try to do, and I think we've done a pretty good job at this, is show how like talking to a person and being somewhat open-minded and compassionate can help you understand like a part of them that, you know, you normally wouldn't see. And that's what we're really about. We're about trying to demonstrate the humanity in people. And like, I mean, as a psychiatrist, I've worked with a lot of people who were criminals, like worked, you know, so as part of residency, you have to work in some sort of forensic work. So in my case, I worked in a jail for 3 months. And so, you know, we're all people at the end of the day, but we try not to comment on goings on without, you know, giving the person, hearing their side. It's not about like their side of the story. Like that implies something else that we're not about, but you know, so no comment.
I can't have a comment. I want to have a comment.
Do you consider yourselves a romantic couple?
Most days, not always. It's hard
I don't know
because
if we're
like,
romantic.
we
I think
are.
we're loving.
Yeah, but that's what makes it romantic, because you're not like, I'm going to take you to a candlelit dinner. You don't do like cheesy
Doesn't that upset
romance
you?
stuff.
Did you want me to?
Listen, a tablecloth once in a while would be nice instead of, you know, what kind of like bring your own silverware places that you like to go. But I think you're full of romance.
Okay.
You made sure, like, every morning, you take care of the coffee in the mornings.
Yeah, that's I mean, if okay.
You're sweet. You're sweet. Increase microphone gain a little.
Nope, I don't think we can. I think it's jacked up, chat.
Just gotta lean forward.
We gotta just move in.
Can this just come here? Can this be right here?
We can do maybe that, but I don't think it's gonna get more than that.
Okay.
But I see someone keeps on. So it looks like people are talking about relationships. So my best friend's girlfriend broke up with him after 8 years of relationship. I am anxious about my responsibility in helping him through it. Any thoughts?
Bread butter. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, any thoughts about that, Kruti?
You know, like, helping somebody through a breakup of a really long-term relationship is like a long-term thing. It's not going to be just like, you know, one night out. Friends that I've had that have like gotten divorced or like gotten out of those big relationships, a lot of their heartache is in just like that sense of like lost time. Like, I could have had kids, or I would have moved there, and like processing that part I think is really tough. So it's, I don't know, as a friend supporting somebody through those like really deep, heart-wrenching breakups, it's about the small things, about being there, not like, do you want to talk about it, but like, you know, let's go do something fun, and then it'll come out, and just knowing that they have an ear is nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think I like this question too by Arc Expert. I mean, so I think it's important to remember that when someone breaks up, right? Like, what is your responsibility as a friend? You know, I think it's to be a friend, and that it's important to remember that like you're not really responsible for them potentially. You know, they have the biggest responsibility in terms of bouncing back from the breakup. So I think, you know, should you be available to them? Should you support them? Sure. If you really want to talk about the next level of responsibility, I think sometimes something that friends don't do enough is when someone is in a relationship for 8 years and they get broken up with, like, there may be things that they are responsible for that made it so that someone dumped them, right? And sometimes as a friend, like, sometimes what you can do if you really want to help someone is like point out to them, or not necessarily point out to them, but explore with them like why the breakup happened and what could you have done differently if you're unhappy about it, things like that. You know, I think it's something that we don't talk about enough, because generally speaking, if you have a friend and your friend gets dumped, like there's very little, generally speaking, we're on the side of our friend, right? Like that's just how we are. And so we're biased towards our friend. But sometimes telling your friend, oh, you're such an amazing person, and they don't know what they're missing, and like you deserve better, but that's not always the case. Like sometimes people get broken up with because they're not, there's something about the relationship that people are deeply unsatisfied with, and that's not something we talk about enough. I mean, I think that's, yeah, but that's hard to do. I mean, that's why, generally speaking, when we talk about challenging people's beliefs for the sake of growth, like that's why we do things like coaching and stuff like that, because that's hard to do as a friend. But if you really want to think about it, that's something you can try. Okay, there was a question about, I fail to have conversations with my parents because our interests and worldviews are very different. How can I change that?
I got in my dad's face the other night. There was a lot of, how dare you? I don't know. I think healthy argument. Are your values very different? If so, I think that's kind of a fun thing to talk about, where your worldview and values have come from. I don't think you can change anybody's worldview, but I think you can change your ability to have a conversation with someone with a different worldview.
Yeah, speaking to that, I mean, having a conversation doesn't require shared interests or even similar worldviews. Like if you kind of think about, back in the day when I was in Boston and Kruti was in New York,
Nothing in common.
we used to take the bus, right? So like I'd be on a bus for like 4.5 hours, or she'd be on a bus for like 4.5 hours, and like you're sitting next to someone, you don't have to agree, you don't have to be of the same worldview, political views, or even have similar interests. You can talk to someone, like you can talk about the weather, or and then I think this is where if there are particular hot button topics like politics or whatever, you can just avoid those topics and talk. There's all kinds of stuff you can talk about. You can talk about food, you can talk about sports if that's your thing.
I don't know. I like getting into the heated stuff, but to each their own.
Yeah. And and I don't.
You don't. Irony.
So
Are you chatty when you're the only when you're sitting next to strangers on buses and planes?
I try not to now. I mean, I tried. Someone asked a question about whether I was always good with people. No. So like social skills can be learned, chat, and you just have to practice them. And so I think there's like little stuff you can do. You can say hi to people. You can smile at them. Just, practice.
Just get a little wink, a little flirt.
That comes later.
Yeah. Caleb Hates Games is graduating from therapy soon.
Congrats.
Thanks for all you do. It has helped so much. Yay, Caleb.
What MBTI type are you two? What do you know what your MBTI type is?
I'm thinking over feeling. I'm extrovert over introvert. That one's like borderline. And then what's the other one? NP?
Or intuitive or sensing?
I think I'm an ENTJ.
I think I'm an ENTP. Sorry, INTP.
Okay. I forget if I'm a P or a J.
I think you're probably a P.
Fates is a P. I forget what P versus J means.
Perceiving versus judging. Your grasp of time is more towards the P.
Yeah. What's an Ollie Bowl?
I got to tell you something.
Uh-huh.
If you see a word you don't recognize in chat,
don't say it.
You can't say it.
Okay.
Okay. You gotta Twitch 101. All right.
Okay. I don't do this very often.
Oh, I know.
Kat from Garfield has a question.
Okay, how can I just be friends with women without eventually catching feelings? So that's a great question. So let's think about that, right? So if you catch feelings, that implies, first of all, that feelings are not permanent, right? Because if you catch it, that means that there's a change in the way that you feel. So there are a couple things about how to avoid catching feelings. The first is that you don't have to actually avoid catching feelings. All you have to do is ride out the feelings, because they weren't there when you started, and they won't be there forever. And so if you catch feelings, eventually they'll subside, because that's what emotions do. Right? So generally speaking, feelings aren't permanent, and which is a tragedy, because the happiness from your wedding day isn't going to last a lifetime. Like, it just doesn't. The second thing is, if you want to, it doesn't last a lifetime. The happiness that we create every day is how we sustain it. What? It was just one day. Like, today's fun. Okay. So, but the other thing to consider is that, generally speaking, if you have outlets for particular feelings or needs, then it's easier to avoid catching feelings. So, for example, let's say I have no one that emotionally supports me through the hard times. So if you have like a a woman is a friend and they are emotionally supportive of you, it's easier to catch feelings. So it's like, so just try to make sure that you have whatever like emotional needs you have, physical needs you have, whatever needs you have. The more that you can get those fulfilled outside of the friendship, the easier it's going to be to avoid catching feelings. And so even like little things like being confident in yourself, for example. Whereas like if you're not confident in yourself and then someone treats you with a lot of respect because they're your friend and that's what friends do, like you can sort of not misinterpret, because I don't think it's just how the brain works. But then it becomes easy to catch feelings.
I'm just going to assume that this is going to take some time. So let's say you work on this, but in the meantime, if you do catch feelings, just don't get weird. Like don't feel like you need to confess something, or you just need to tell this girl how you feel, or like try to stay away from like just one-on-one behind closed doors situations. I don't know. Catching feelings in some ways is like normal and okay, I think. Just don't let it get the better of you. I'm not a doctor. No. I run all the business and operations side for Healthy Gamer.
There's a question that someone keeps asking about trigeminal neuralgia. So a couple of things. So trigeminal neuralgia, like in my experience, like clinical experience, can be absolutely devastating.
What is that?
So it is a like improper activation of the trigeminal nerve. So it's the trigeminal nerve is in your face, and so what people with trigeminal neuralgia will feel, sometimes if you have an injury or some kind of like potentially viral infection, you can get activation of that nerve, and it can be like crippling pain. The thing about trigeminal neuralgia is that the course can be quite variable. So I've seen some people that have been absolutely debilitated from it, and I've seen some people where it actually does get better, and it's like quite responsive to different things. So it's a real case-by-case basis, and I think that from a psychiatric perspective, like I have gotten a lot of patients who have quite bad trigeminal neuralgia, and I've been able to help them some. It's honestly something that I wish I could have spent more time on clinically, like learning how to help people with those kinds of like nerve conditions or things like that. I think unfortunately though, like mileage varies a lot. There is some evidence that things like meditation can help with trigeminal neuralgia, but honestly the evidence isn't great. It doesn't mean that it can't help. So if the evidence isn't great for something, that doesn't mean it doesn't work. That just means we're not really sure yet, or we haven't really figured out in what way to optimize the benefit.
This is kind of an interesting question from Skredzen.
Mm-hmm. Hi, this is out of topic. I'm born in a Christian family, got baptized and used to go to church frequently. Growing up, I got hooked by Buddhism philosophy and practice. I'm kind of confused, and I feel like I have to take a side. Okay. So let's understand something, okay? So I understand you feel like you have to take a side. But taking a side on religion is largely an Abrahamic religion concept, right? So if we look at like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and if I'm mischaracterizing this, please let me know if you're an expert in stuff. I'm not. But if you look at it, there's like a common thread in those three religions, which is like there are people of the religion and there are people not of the religion, right? So either you're a Christian or you're not a Christian. Either you are a Muslim or you're not a Muslim. There's the Gentiles and the Jews. So that tribal aspect of like being a part of the tribe or not part of the tribe is really like an Abrahamic concept. So if you grew up in a Christian tradition, I can imagine that your view of religion is that you've got to pick, right? Because if you think about something like baptism or confirmation in Catholicism, those are like binary things. Like there are the people who are baptized and there are people who are not baptized. So it's like a us versus, it's not versus, us or them. Whereas if you look at Buddhism, like you can't convert to Buddhism. I mean, sure, I'm sure people out there will convert you to Buddhism, but you can't really convert to Buddhism. Like, it's not like if you actually look at the teachings of the Buddha, Buddha didn't say, hey, y'all got to join this club. And everyone who's not a part of this club is not a part of the club. That's not really an Eastern religious concept. The same thing is true of Hinduism, where there are things that are analogous to conversion, but they're not really conversion. So from a Buddhist perspective, you can go to church every day and, like, generally speaking, I think this is a pretty safe thing to say. Most Buddhist doctrine will not care about that. Like,
Yeah.
so even the idea that you have to choose is something that is really from a Abrahamic standpoint, right? Because they have words. Like in the Abrahamic tradition, you have words for, like, the infidels or not infidels, or the Gentiles or the Jews. Whereas I'm sure that there are words in Buddhism and Hinduism too for people who are not that, but it's not a central part of the religion. So Buddhism is really about, it's a philosophy of how to live your life. It's not about what you believe. Beliefs or faith don't really enter into it. They can be useful. There are reasons to have faith and there are benefits to faith, but it's not central.
Every church, I think, is different. So sometimes it's the specific church that makes you feel like you have to do things within that church's way, not even like the religion's way, but that church's way of things.
Has someone entered the house?
Yeah, your cousin. She's picking up the rice. We're throwing a party tonight, and there's a lot of logistics between kids and food, so you might see us like texting and answering doors and stuff. But I think it's awesome that you are open-minded and exploring things that work for you. I would just not feel pressured to choose a side. Do what's best for you, not necessarily what's best for your church or whoever else.
Yeah, aren't there children that grow up with one Christian parent, one Jewish? Yeah, there are kids who grow up with parents of different religions all the time. And I think sometimes that works really well, and sometimes it's a point of frustration and contention.
Yeah. How did you gain confidence in yourself and your relationship? Asks Stone Master Alex.
You want to take that?
I have no confidence.
I mean, for me, it was slow, to be honest. Like, I was not confident in the relationship at all at the beginning. I was sure we were going to, first of all, I didn't know we were dating.
Well, we met super young, too.
Yeah. So when you start dating someone in college who's a freshman, like, what's going to happen, right? You're going to break up at some point. Like, people, when you're a junior and you date a freshman in college, that doesn't turn into marriage and kids. That just, a few months in, obviously she's going to meet someone, or a year in, she's going to realize that there's better stuff, and the relationship will end. And so it took me a while to really, I want to say about 2 years to really be confident in the relationship.
Yeah, I think so.
When I was doing my victory lap as a fifth-year senior, that's when I was like, maybe she's sticking around. After you fail to graduate in 4 years and she doesn't break up with you?
I think I did like a study abroad program, and we were long distance at the time. And then when I came back, and that was when I was like, okay, this is where I want to be, who I want to be with, who I want to be, what I think we could be together. And that's when I started developing more confidence in like what we were long term. But all of that is based on just wanting to be with each other.
Yeah, I think there's a question about polyamory too. So,
my favorite question.
So I think in terms of relationships, one of the things that I've noticed, so we got together quite young, and I think a big part of the advantage of that is we weren't like fully formed human beings. And what I tend to see is that a lot of people are like looking for a finished product in a relationship. right? So you're looking for someone who checks all these boxes. And I'm not saying that that may work for some people, but I think one of the advantages for us is that we were able to influence each other.
I smoked cigarettes like when we met, and like he was very like, I would never date a smoker.
Yeah.
And you were a gamer, and I was like, I would never date a gamer. Like there's no way if we had met online and we had like shared interest and disclosed these things about ourselves that we would have even gotten together in the first place. So
Yeah.
I think you really got a blank slate, no check boxes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just the main thing is how much are the two of y'all invested in like building a life that either of you could not put together. So in the case of like, gaming and cigarettes, let's say, like, am I so attached to gaming? Because sometimes what happens is people are like, oh, I'm not gonna change for anyone, right? Like that, I get to decide what I do with my time, which is...
And I deserve the best. I deserve to blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Which is fine if that's what you want. But I think like the whole point is when it comes to things like gaming, if I'm gaming too much and Kruthi like talks to me about it, right? It's like, okay, well, what are we doing here? And I think the whole point of a relationship is that you do want to change, right? Like, but the changes that you want to make are things that benefit like both of you and benefit the relationship. So I think change and growing as a person is like a really, really important part of a relationship. I think the problem is that there are people out there who will advocate for their partner to change as a substitute to they themselves changing. Right? So I think it's got to be like reciprocal. That's a big thing. And it's not like tit for tat where if I change this, you've got to give up this. But it's like, okay, what are we working towards? Like the whole point is we're on the same team. And if we're on the same team, like what are the good things to do? Like what do we want to like accomplish on this team? And accomplishing things as a team that both of y'all are aligned towards may require individual sacrifices. I think the tricky thing though is that everyone out there is like looking for the right person to do that with, whereas I think like the right person may not have all the checkboxes. The whole point is that they're the right person. And so you pick a person, not an attribute of a person. And then hopefully, with both of y'all working towards it, you'll start to check all the boxes together.
I agree. I think being super fixed in your ways and like that sense of entitlement of I deserve this and, I should have this. And so much of that is not even based on reality. It's based on, this fake stuff that we see online. Anyway, point made.
So there are a lot of good questions here.
So good. There was a question up top. I forget who asked it. Just on like, how do you ask somebody out? How and when? Which is funny because we skipped that step. Alec was like,
well, apparently I asked you out. I just didn't know I was asking you out.
You asked me, do I eat lunch?
There you go.
And I was like, yes, I eat lunch. And somehow we made a very vague lunch plan.
So I guess what you do is you ask them basic questions.
Yeah. Do you like to eat food?
I mean, I still remember our first date, as you call it. There's some good stuff up here too.
I call it.
I didn't know I didn't ask you out on a date. No, that's what it was.
All right.
You thought I was asking you out. I just told you. I was like, hey, there's a good you like Thai food? Do you eat lunch?
I had never had Thai food at that time.
Oh, you never had Thai food?
No.
That was the first time you had Thai food in your whole life?
Oh, no, I think I had it once during like orientation or something. Yeah.
And it's one of your favorite foods now.
It is, and you don't like it.
I don't like bad Thai food.
Okay, listen, don't ever do this to your partner. Never be like, oh, I'm going to expose you to this new thing, and then make them love it, and then be like, I secretly don't like it anymore. Don't do that.
No, I love Thai food. I just don't like a lot of these American Thai restaurants.
Nobody likes American Thai restaurants.
A lot of people do. That's why they're all over the place.
No, they're all over the
Americans
place
love
because
American
they
Thai
get away
restaurants.
with it.
Okay, hold on. There's a good question here about what do you do if a relationship gets boring?
Y'all are going so fast.
Okay,
We're
so
going-
Hickeyberry is asking, what do you do if a relationship gets boring? So this is a couple things.
Start streaming.
Okay. So the thing is, when you say, what do you do if a relationship gets boring, that implies that the boringness is within the relationship. So this is where, like remember that the relationship is a product of the two people involved, right? So the boringness doesn't necessarily come from the relationship. It can come from each of the individuals. So this is where I'd say that, this is where you've got to like talk to your partner about, hey, like, what do you...
I disagree. Don't be like, hey, this is getting boring. What should we do about it? I would not have an honest conversation about this.
Yeah, that's a good point. I never actually do that.
When I get boring?
Well, we don't...
Here's what we've done. We've started like listening to audiobooks together. Like, because at some point we just run out of stuff to talk about, right?
Yeah.
And that's because you're too like internal. So we needed like more external.
Don't have an honest... This makes me question much of the advice that I give on the internet.
Yeah, that's why I'm here.
Yeah, so I don't think like you talk to your partner and say, hey, this relationship is boring. But I mean, that's not actually what I do. But I think that you have to remember that you have a... We get bored all the time.
Yeah. But we'll say like, oh, we need a new show or a new book or let's do something new.
We don't use the word bored.
Where do you want to go this weekend instead of what do you want
like
to
let's do
this
something.
Weekend? Yeah.
So that's where I think it's important to remember that you have responsibility in that relationship being boring.
Okay, so you need something to do and you need something to talk about, I think. So find a physical activity that you guys can do together. So one of the ones was rock climbing. I stopped getting my nails done so we can start going rock climbing again. Tennis is my preference, but you don't like tennis. But find things like that. And we've had this conversation a million times for like activities to do together. And then like listen to podcasts together. I do this actually with my sister, whom I love, but I feel like we have nothing to talk about anymore. So we traded. And she was like, you listen to this book. And I was like, great, you listen to this podcast because I want to talk to you about AI in the news and this Elon Musk Twitter debacle. Like, I want to be able to talk to her about stuff like that. And she wants to talk to me about other stuff. So...
Yeah, so I think remember that like a relationship requires raw materials to stay interesting, right? You need something like you need inputs. And you can sort of create those with intentionality. And that's where like if you're bored in a relationship, you can, I think Kruthi's right. You don't go to your partner and say, "Hey, I'm bored in this relationship."
Yeah.
But you can talk to them about, "Hey, like, what do you want to do? Like, is there like any suggestion, like, maybe we should do this or maybe we should do this." And like, you should start thinking about how to make the relationship more interesting as well. Do y'all want to learn a new skill together? Like we've done that kind of thing. Like Kruthi was saying about rock climbing. It's like, because you'll be bored, right? And then, but it's like, okay, like, what are we going to do this weekend? Like, let's do something. And then you can like contribute to it. So like so we read a book together. My impression of the book was very different from her impression of the book. But we both enjoyed it a lot. Since we read the book together, there started to be this inside joke. And then I actually found a subpar board game that is based on the book.
Column of Fire.
Yeah, Column of Fire by Ken Follett. Y'all read Ken Follett?
Oh, they're going so fast.
I know, there's too much. I can't keep up.
They're so fast. It looks like you guys are getting jobs and winning money and starting your own businesses and supporting lots of people, which is so awesome. I love seeing that.
Yeah.
Oh, this is such a good way to put it. Sam Bam, thanks, ma'am. I'm not bored in the relationship. I'm bored and I'm in the relationship.
That's one of the things that the relationship is supposed to help with.
All right, cool.
Yes. So Okoka is saying, just have kids, no time to be bored. While that is true, I would never recommend having kids to resolve any problems in your relationship.
Then why'd you get me pregnant?
Because it wasn't to solve a problem. That's my point, is that you shouldn't have kids to solve problems. You should actually have like a very stable relationship before you have kids.
Okay. I guess we did that. I'm seeing kind of questions about grievance
Okay.
or like grief processing, grief support. Ooh, and constant yelling in the house. These are great questions. You do grievance, I'll do constant yelling.
Okay. Good afternoon. So Garrido's asking, good afternoon. I was curious, your advice. My fiance recently passed. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, dude.
Very sorry to hear that.
Or girl. How does one go about handling the sadness yet acknowledgement that there is nothing I can do to change it but carry on in her honor? I fear too much suppression could be damaging, but what is the point of being sad if I can't do anything to change it? That's a complicated question.
Yeah.
So let's understand a couple of like basics about the grieving process. The first is that it is it's a natural process, right? So it's not something that going through it is like a normal part of how the human body, brain, mind, soul, whatever, processes a loss. Second thing is that how does one go about handling the sadness yet acknowledgement that there is nothing I can do? So this is a really important misconception that we have, that emotions require an action. Right? So if I'm feeling sad, the goal is to do something so that I no longer feel sad. Sadness is something that should be run away from because I don't like feeling it. And that's the idea, right? If an event makes me sad, let me change that event so I can be happy. Which is completely normal to want to think that way, but that's actually like why we have such a bad dopamine addiction problem in our society today, because people are running away from negative emotions. And if I watch some cat videos on TikTok, like, I'm going to be happy, right? So you don't have to, the sadness is not something that, the experience of sadness can sometimes be the way that you let it go. So by feeling your emotions and kind of like just feeling them without doing anything or even reacting to them too strongly, just like the sadness is like, it's the grief coming out. And when grief comes out, it expresses itself as sadness or tears or whatever. So that's okay. Suppressing too much may be harmful, but it's actually quite healthy to suppress some emotions some of the time, especially when it comes to grief. So the other thing to remember about grief is if you want to suppress it for a little while, go for it. Like, I wouldn't recommend using substances or things like that to suppress it. But grief is also like a complicated process because it can last years. Now, that doesn't mean that you're sad every day for years. What that means is that on the anniversary of their passing or on their birthday or something like that, a year later, you've actually been happy for the last 6 months. And then you wake up one day and suddenly like the sadness hits you. That's also completely normal. So I don't think you need to worry about suppressing it too much. Just make sure you have a good support system. And remember that much like getting a cold, grief for the most part is something that your body knows how to handle, even though the handling of it sucks. So just, be a little bit thoughtful, try to get some support. And this is also really important. We have a video about post-traumatic growth, which I think honestly it's one of our more important videos that I think we did a poor job of really explaining because it's kind of a complicated subject. But the other thing that's really interesting is that the grieving process actually strengthens us oftentimes in many ways. So even as you kind of say, and a big part of like, how do you sort of end the grief is when you internalize whatever you took away from the relationship and you make it a part of yourself in a positive way. So you even said something about, how do you honor her memory? And you're like, okay, I'm going to honor her memory by doing A, B, and C. And then you like make the world a better place. You feel better about it. People are grateful to you. And it kind of like ends up positive, which is what's really interesting.
Very sorry for your loss. Okay, thanks for that.
You wanted to talk about yelling in the house?
Yeah, somebody, I think Krish maybe
King
asked.
Krish Live.
Yeah, asked what to do about constant yelling in the house. And I relate to that one a lot because everything's kind of cool now, but when I was in high school, there was just so much yelling. And I had to just leave. I would be like, okay, I'm going to go for a drive. I think you just got to kind of get out and also signal to your parents, like, I do not want to be here when you do this. So even if you're just going to take a walk or whatever, I don't know. Sometimes I think parents, they just kind of get away with stuff because they're the ones making the rules, and like they kind of go harder and harder, right? And they don't have that feedback necessarily from their kids. Like, yeah, kids will be like, Mom, Dad, stop yelling. But a lot of times that doesn't break through to people. Like, if you think about yourself, when you're really angry and somebody tells you to calm down, you're not going to calm down, right? And so if Mom and Dad are yelling and you say, Mom, Dad, stop yelling, calm down, like that's not really going to help. But if you just signal to them like this is not where you want to be and you just get out of there, I think that's kind of, in my experience, that was the strongest signal I could send, is like, you guys are on your own. I do not want to be here when y'all are like this, and just leaving. And of course there's fallout when you come back. Like, people are still pissed, but like it's more of a loud conversation than it is yelling. I don't know.
There's a question about whether you're my boss and whether I have performance reviews.
We are going to do annualized performance reviews this year, and
yeah.
I don't know. I think maybe technically, but not really in practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say when it comes down to it, generally speaking, yes, right? But I think performance reviews are a really good example of like how to make this work. Because the whole point is that we have a professional relationship and we have a personal relationship, and those two things don't cross.
Right.
And so by having performance reviews, like, you know, it's like we're going to have performance reviews at 4 p.m. on, let's say, a Thursday. And then like once those performance reviews are done, then we each have maybe 1 hour of work, and then it's like 6 p.m. and we're going to take our kids to dinner. And those things are completely separated. So we don't talk about, and if she gives me feedback in the performance review or I give her feedback, we give each other feedback a lot because we're colleagues. And, you know, honestly, it took a while to figure out how to do that well, but I think it works really, really well if you do it right, which is just to understand that you have two separate relationships and that the two don't, you know, they don't really blend. And like you have to be able to separate out the personal stuff from the work stuff, which we're not always perfect at.
Following up with King Krish. Yeah, you got to separate the relationships to do both well. But I think our professional relationship is, we need to work on that a little, I think.
Certainly. Which we've had professional conversations about recently.
Yes, we have.
And the shortcomings of our professional relationship and how we need to be better at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that Sasha Shenku is, what's your opinion on the DSM and how it was first written? I mean, so this is pretty common knowledge, I think, if you study psychiatry, that the DSM was not designed as a clinical tool. The DSM was designed as a research tool. So my understanding of it is that a bunch of people were like, okay, how are we going to study depression? Like, we need some common set. Like, when you do a study on depression and I do a study on depression, how do we know that we're dealing with the same thing? Or let's say a mood disorder. So then what they did is they classified it as a mood disorder. Here are the features of a mood disorder. But then still the primary purpose was inclusion criteria for research subjects. So it wasn't ever designed to be a clinical thing. Then what happened is, as we started doing research on, let's say, mood disorders like bipolar disorder, and we discovered, okay, this medication works for bipolar disorder, then we sort of fell into this issue of, okay, how do we know if this medication works for this patient? Well, how similar is the patient to the research criteria? And that's when it really started getting blended. And now we sort of use the DSM clinically, but I think the good news about the DSM is that it's becoming more and more clinically useful with each iteration, because we're starting to realize that it's not, you know, it needs to be more clinically useful. And there are also movements within psychiatry, like RDoC is a good example of this, where people are trying to redesign the diagnostic criteria of mental illness that is free from the DSM. So there are intentional attempts to kind of do that.
It's really cool actually to see what's happening in psychiatry, especially because it was fairly stagnant for like one or two generations, and now there's like so much energy into reclassifying and trying to like redraw the lines and organize the information. A lot more innovation in the space. It's pretty cool. Okay. I saw a question about if you're having problems in the relationship, should you go to individual or couples counseling? Here from Danielle.
So I would say Danny Gel Sibyl is would you recommend individual or couples counseling for relationship problems? So I think that depends on whether you carry the problems between relationships, in short. So if you consistently have problems in relationships, then I think individual counseling is probably the right move. If there is a specific issue that y'all are working through in couples counseling or in your relationship, then I think couples counseling can be good. Generally speaking, I think both of them, it's not like both of them can work, and generally speaking, either case. So I would say that if there are two relatively healthy, well-adjusted people who are having a particular conflict, then couples counseling can be very helpful. But I'm a big fan of individual therapy, even for relationship problems. Like, so I think it works really, really well.
I would say, practically speaking, approaching your partner and saying, hey, I'd like for you to come to one of my sessions is going to go over a lot better than like, I think we need to go to couples therapy. So practically speaking, for you to initiate your own individual therapeutic relationship and then explore with that therapist, hey, could we do some couples sessions? Practically speaking, I think will make it happen a little bit smoother.
Yeah, so I just kind of building on that, like the reason to go to couples counseling, I don't think it's quite as simple. I mean, that's oftentimes what happens, is people sort of saying, hey, you need to come to couples therapy. That's oftentimes what happens because people are usually desperate by that point. But I think one way to kind of approach it is like, hey, this thing that's happening in our relationship, do you think this is a problem? What are our options for dealing with this problem? And it's kind of like, and couples therapy is just one avenue to deal with a problem in a relationship. And then the kind of question becomes like, do we want to deal with it efficiently and get it done in like, let's say 6 to 16 weeks? Because that's what really a therapist offers you, right? So you can try to muddle around on your own and figure it out, hopefully eventually. But the whole point of seeing a professional, whether it's a therapist or in other things like coaching, for example, like what's the value of a coach, is to help you get there faster. So in therapy is kind of the same way. Like there's some problems that maybe you need therapy, but there's this shame that comes with, oh my God, now we need therapy because our relationship is falling apart. I don't really see it that way. I see it as therapy as a tool that you can use to quickly improve your relationship or resolve a problem. It's kind of like calling a plumber when your sink is clogged. Like you may be able to muddle through and manage, but why? Hickeyberry is saying, I wish Dr. K was my boss too. I bet she is a great one. I don't know if you're talking about Dr. K or Mrs. K, but I am a terrible boss.
Alok is
I'm not the best boss. I mean, I'm great in a lot of ways, but
so many ways.
Also not the best in many ways.
I think Alok's sheer brain power and his ideas around what the vision for what coaching could do, what coaching should be, how groups could work better together, how this is what people need to know and what order they need to know it. I think he's much more of a visionary than he is like an executor. So actually, no, I take that back. You execute, but the management of the pieces is
Yeah, so
your
I
shortcoming.
don't think I'm a very good day-to-day manager, although I'm learning.
And you can learn.
And I think probably the good, like I think I'm much better with people that aren't direct reports to me. So having me be in your workplace and available if you're running into trouble is good, I think. But sometimes I can be frustrating to work with.
It's more because, and we both have this problem, which we both need to get better at, is you'll have an idea and we'll get excited about that idea, and then we have to like realign everything that we're doing around that idea. So I think when we think about 2023, it's really about like setting a plan and sticking to that plan. Unless there's something catastrophic or we really didn't think through something, but I think you're good. Your job is safe, I will say. HG's plans for 2023, some hints. We've been approached so many times by so many parents, so we're trying to build some things out for parents without it kind of affecting our day-to-day experience with you guys, but trying to find a good place for parents to come in. So like even in King Krish's example, I would love to be able to work with those parents. And so we have a family coaching program that we're looking to expand next year. What's that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, so, so much of the stuff that y'all struggle with, I realized at some point this year that
Congratulations, Awaka.
there's only the situation that y'all are in today. There's only so much responsibility you actually have over it, right? Like, if we really look at the fundamentals of, like, I saw a message about someone sort of saying, like, oh, I have trouble, like, keeping up with daily chores, and we have so many, like, gifted kids, and, like, really, if you really think about what's the real solution to half the problems in our community, it has nothing to do with y'all. Do you get that? It's like people like, oh, I'm in an avoidant attachment. I have an avoidant attachment style. My partner has an anxious attachment style. How do we navigate that in a relationship? And it's like, I get that, right? That's challenging. But if we really look at it, where did that problem start? That problem started with your parents. And so in Healthy Gamer, something that we've sort of glossed over really is that actually half y'all's problems aren't really your fault. And so then the question kind of becomes, okay, well, what do we do about that? And then we started to wonder, like, okay, like what would happen if we could help parents be better parents? Now, there are upsides and downsides to this. The upside is that hopefully we can help people be better parents. And if we can help people be better parents, they will raise a generation it'll help Gen Alpha. The problem is that ship has sailed for y'all. And so I don't know how much helping parents will help you. We do think it'll help a fair amount because we've had some good experiences with parents, like even like with kids in their 20s and stuff where we can, it's kind of weird. Like sometimes we'll get this call and this parent will be like, hey, can I sign up my kid for your coaching program? We'll be like, why would you want to do that? And they're like, the kid has all these problems.
Take my kid, fix it.
Yep. And then we'll be like, well, we're not so sure that your kid needs the coaching program. And he's like, what do you mean? He's doing all this stuff wrong. And it's like, well, why don't you sign up? He's like, I don't have any problems. And then it's like, well, maybe it's that kind of attitude that you want to outsource someone to fix your kid instead of like understanding your kid and stuff like that. Like maybe that's actually part of the problem. And so what we'll do is we think you should sign up.
What we also did was
sometimes they'll say, okay, fine.
Customer service to take these calls. So it's not just all of being like, who's the problem is, it's you.
Honestly, though, right? Because there are a lot of parents out there that are like, oh, my kid is not living up to my expectations. Let me go find some expert in the field. And if I find an expert who's brilliant enough, that'll fix the problem. The problem is I've taken him everywhere and nothing works. And so it's like, well, hold on a second. Maybe the problem's not the kid if you've tried a dozen things and none of it's working. Like, what do you mean? It's like, well, why don't you join up for a little bit. And
There's a lot of, you're supposed to be the best. If you can't do it, nobody can do it. You're my last chance. You fix my kid. And then a lot of, you don't need the best to fix your kid. You need to work on yourself. And that can be done with almost anyone.
Yeah, there's so many studies that show that parents, so providing mental health treatment to parents has positive clinical outcomes on the kids.
So that's one thing we're thinking about for 2023. We're also trying to figure out, thanks for all of the love and the feedback on the guide. It means so much to us because we put so much into making those guides for y'all. So we're trying to figure out, do we do more modules? Do we go a monthly subscription instead, and like kind of combine community events with the guide experience? Because we do so many things. So we're trying to figure out how to make it the most approachable for y'all. We have groups, we have community events, we have coaching, we have guides, we have all this content, we have great discussion forums. So how to kind of package these different pieces together into the right experiences for you guys. So that's kind of the big thrust behind 2023.
Yeah, so I see a couple of good things. So Barika is saying parents have it rough. They kind of lose scenario. I completely agree. So I think this is where like our approach, sometimes while I can be like a little bit critical of parents, I think the biggest issue is, so I think we think parents need help, right? So we don't send them to jail. We're like, let us help you because you all need help. And so I think this is the tricky thing. So I realized this kind of recently. It's kind of weird. So I was like thinking about, okay, like what do parents need to know about raising their kids? And then what I did is I thought about all the patients who have come into my office. And I thought to myself, okay, like what could their parents have done differently to avoid them ever showing up in my office? And the answer is there's not always something they could have done differently, because sometimes it's really not the parents' fault. But I'd say like literally in half of the cases, and this is why if you think about therapy, like what do we talk about there? We talk about your upbringing, right? We're like, oh, like did your parents do this with you? Did your parents do that with you? Did your parent, like, we talk about your upbringing, because that's when the trauma happens. And so then hold on a second. If we really want to fix this, like what should we be doing? We should be educating parents about the basics of like meeting their children's emotional needs and how to challenge them appropriately and how to listen. And like, this is actually what kids need. Because there are a lot of kids who have good parenting and they turn out fine, right? They have secure attachment. So we know this is doable, and we know that like 30% of the world doesn't.
Wait,
and so
only 30% of the world raises securely attached kids?
I want to say it's higher, but I don't know the statistics, so I'm lowballing it
Okay.
for the sake of. And theoretically, there are 4 types, and so you think that maybe there are 25. I'd really say secure attachment's probably closer to 50%.
Okay.
But and then I got curious, right? So I did something. I looked at parenting books, and then I realized all the parenting books are like diagnosis specific.
Can I just say, when Olive gets curious about something, like the Amazon boxes start.
So yeah, I read a lot of books. So I realized that all these parenting books are like parenting a child with OCD. And that's when I realized, wait a second, all the parenting advice is post-diagnosis. There's no parenting, there's like no book about like how do you prevent an anxiety disorder in a child, or what are the things that you can do to like develop secure. I mean, the secure attachment parenting books we have, that's the one good example.
Most of the parenting world is about babies. So the adolescent stage is severely lacking. So we're excited to kind of be working more in that space.
And I saw someone signed up for coaching. Please report back.
Yeah,
tell us how it goes.
Honestly, we've trained 11 groups of coaches, and each coaching cohort has better and better outcomes certified. I apologize, I misspoke. So we've certified 11 cohorts of coaches. Yeah. Okay, got it. Um, and with each cohort, the curriculum improvements like are demonstrated in the outcomes, and it's pretty amazing. So we're very open to feedback to make sure that we keep making the program stronger. Yeah, good feedback in your coaching process. You'll have what's called a PSF, a post-session feedback form. So those are pretty actively monitored. And then, so there's two pieces of feedback we look at, right? One is your outcomes. So are we improving big pieces of your life? And then the second part is your post-session feedback is, are you enjoying coaching? Was this a good session? What went well? What could have been better? And so what we look at is how do we strengthen the outcomes, but also how do we strengthen the kind of weekly experience?
Yeah, so I see a couple other coaching comments. I tried career coaching and it was okay, but it was over 6 months ago. I don't know exactly what okay means. I think generally speaking, people are very happy with career coaching, and it's been one of our programs that's steadily grown through word of mouth as people are like having good outcomes. I do think one of the challenges around career coaching is that people's problems are so different that sometimes people do have variable experiences. But thank you very much for sharing, that it was okay. And hopefully in your post-session feedback and stuff, if there are other things that you think that your coach could have done better or like problems that we weren't able to help you with, please let us know.
The thing with career coaching is it generally takes more time to implement some of that stuff, right? Because it's not like you can kind of week one have like a goal of I want to raise or promotion or I want to start my own business, and then by week 12 it's all happened. So career coaching can go slow. I'm not saying that's what this person's experience was, but career coaching in particular can be a longer process.
Someone else is saying, I've had an amazing experience with my coach and would love to talk about that more. Should I send an email? Well, you can, but I think, you can include whatever you want in the post-session feedback, right? You should be getting that.
But I'm so glad that you've had an amazing experience. I'm seeing more stories about coaching along with therapy has made a big difference. Thinking about taking a break from coaching after a year. Awesome.
I think that sounds good.
And one of the things that I'm really proud of is we do our coaching in weeks, not years, because we want you guys to be able to benefit and move on. We don't want to keep you guys around forever and ever. That's kind of one of our critiques with the way the mental health kind of complex currently runs things.
And I think like taking a break is great, or even being done is great too, right? So the whole point of coaching and what we do, not just coaching, but just HG as a whole, is we've said this many times, like the goal is for y'all to be able to leave. You don't have to leave. We've changed that. I used to say the goal is for y'all to leave, but now I realize that people don't want to go, which is totally fine. So you're welcome to hang out as much as you want. And that's why so part of our focus actually in 2022 was community events. I don't know if y'all kind of noticed that. But we built out a big infrastructure for community events, because then the question is, okay, if you finish coaching and let's say you get stuff taken care of, right? And now you're like on a positive trajectory. How do you continue growing post-coaching? And that's where I think some of these things like right in the fields and stuff like that really come in, where, you don't have to, you can learn and grow with Healthy Gamer, like prior to coaching, post-coaching, like that's why we have videos and streams and stuff like that, right? And right in the fields and some of our community events are for people who are looking for, I also saw one person sort of mention that they're broke and can't afford it. And so we've tried to build things that are like free.
I also saw this one. Take your jobs. Dr. K a while back mentioned if you can spend monthly for weed, you can spend for coaching. And I was like, yeah, right.
So that's that's true too, which is that a lot of people say, oh, I can't afford this. And sometimes you really can't, right? But sometimes like what we can afford is really depends on what we're willing to pay for or what we're not willing to pay for.
What are the factors of success or failure in coaching? I feel like this is like success or failure in anything you try. Pink sausage.
Yeah, so I tried coaching and it didn't help me much. Should I try it again? What are the factors that led to success or failure in coaching? What a great question. So the first is, if you tried it and it didn't help you much, I would not recommend trying it again. I'm not saying you shouldn't try it again, but I wouldn't say, yeah, you should absolutely try it again. So the first thing to understand is that coaching is really for people, it's not for everybody. So if you really have mental illness concerns, so if you've got something like OCD or like bad anxiety or things like that, then I would definitely recommend therapy. So what coaching really is the stuff that therapy kind of doesn't specialize in, which is not fixing something that's broken, it's building something positive. And so if you're trying to figure out, okay, I don't know what to do with my life, there is not like a class you take when you're training to be a therapist that's like, how do people figuring out what to do with your life. That's not something that we learn as therapists. Most of our training is clinical. So it's like, if someone has narcissistic personality disorder, how do you recognize it? How do you help them? It's not really about finding purpose and direction. Now, a lot of therapists will do that kind of work, but it's not actually what we're trained in. So the first thing is, if your needs are not really appropriate for coaching, I don't think coaching will be able to help you much. And we've certainly seen clients with that before, where they're not really like, they tried it and they were looking for something that coaching can't really provide. Second thing is that when people say, okay, what leads to success and failure? So coaching is really about you as a participant. So sometimes what happens in coaching, and this can happen in therapy too, is you show up expecting that someone else will fix things for you. It's kind of like, I'm going to show up and they're going to kind of run the show. And part of our coaching program is a little bit weird this way, because you may say, okay, I need to figure out what I want to do with my life. And then they come to coaching looking for answers. And our whole philosophy is like, we can't give you answers, because we can have general advice. We can understand science and, epidemiologic studies and statistics and all that kind of stuff. But the whole reason that you need an individualized approach is because we don't know what part of that applies to you. And the basic issue is that you can get advice, right? People can tell you what to do. And people just wake up every day at 6 a.m. and go for a run. It's the way to put your life together. But the challenge is that the application of the advice requires an individualized approach, because your psychology is unique. You have a unique cognitive fingerprint. You have a unique, brain. You have unique childhood experiences. And so what we tend to see is that the people who do the best in coaching are the ones that come looking to understand themselves first, and then take that understanding and really challenge themselves to apply it to their life. And I think another big part of it is that, oftentimes you need to be okay being challenged. Challenges that our coaches have with clients are clients that are over intellectual. So they'll analyze everything, and they'll be like, I can't. So that's where this happens all the time on the internet, where everyone's figuring out these complicated solutions to these very, they read the psychoanalysis subreddit and then read Carl Jung and all this kind of stuff. Whereas over intellectualizing it may not work. So a lot of times people come looking for some kind of magic bullet that will fix everything for them. They're looking for a way to fix things in an easy way. But the truth is that sometimes it's just hard. So I think clients who are willing to be challenged, clients who are willing to be flexible about what they need. So another challenge that we run into is that some clients, what they want and what they need are two different things. And if you come in looking for what you want, but you're not open-minded about what you may need, which is what your coach may tell you, then oftentimes it's not going to work. And then the other part of it, though, is that it's very possible that you as a client did all of those things and coaching still didn't work for you, which is possible, right? That's got to happen sometimes. It's got to happen. And so it could be a failure of your coach, right? That's another reason why coaching doesn't work, is that your coach didn't do a good enough job. It's absolutely a possibility. I think we tend to do pretty well around that. So our quality controls are quite good and our coaches are quite good. And then at the end of the day, though, it's not for everyone. So I think if you're really looking to understand yourself, if you're looking to make a prompt change, and if you're okay being open-minded and stepping away from the conclusions that you've already formed, because that's really what it's about. Because the whole problem is if you form the conclusion and you still have the problem, maybe there's a misdiagnosis. And so sometimes when people come in and they're operating on that conclusion, they don't do better.
I saw some great questions about people feeling stuck in therapy, not knowing if they should kind of take a break from therapy, if they should quit therapy, if they just have a crappy therapist. How do you know? I'm going to just kind of paraphrase all of these questions into one. Like, what do you do if you feel therapy just isn't working? We can do a specific video about that if you'd rather.
No, I mean, I'm
and
sure
we can
we will.
keep
but
it chill.
I'm just
This poor guy's gonna be at
I-
this party tonight. He's gonna be taking questions like this all night.
So here's what the sigh was like. I've been so frustrated by sometimes some of the therapists that my patients have had. Which maybe you're looking at that as splitting or whatever, right? So, which is actually part of the problem. So here's the challenge with a lot of therapy, is that I've met far too many therapists who, when things aren't going well, they blame the patient. So I'm going to give you all just one example. So I once had a patient that mentioned to their therapist that the periods of silence are very uncomfortable. And then the therapist was like, yes, they can certainly be uncomfortable. And then the periods of silence continued. So the therapist's perspective is like, silence can be uncomfortable and it's okay to be uncomfortable. And like, the patient needs to work through it and they can kind of fill the space. And like, they have like all these reasons to be quiet, right? It's the way that they were trained is a simple way to put it. But sometimes like therapists are so caught up in their perspective on things that they don't listen to patients. This has been my judgment. Now, this is where what a therapist would do when they hear that is they'll say, oh, this is a case of splitting, where this patient likes you because you're willing to do X, Y, or Z, and that other therapist isn't doing anything wrong. Okay? It's just like you're caught up, this is splitting, where the patient idolizes one therapist and does not idolize and demonizes the other therapist. And now I want you all to think for a second, if you understand this stuff. Think about what this means for feedback for the profession of therapy. When a patient actually makes a complaint and you explain it away as a psychoanalytic defense mechanism, what is going to happen to the quality of therapy? And this is one of the things that I find incredibly, incredibly frustrating, is that therapists, too many therapists I've met, will explain away their shortcomings by some psychological complex on the part of the patient. And if you're a therapist and you listen to that and you're like, oh, this person is getting caught up in splitting, just think about that for a second. If you actually have one crappy therapist and one good therapist and you explain it away by splitting, you're never actually going to improve the profession. Because we're ignoring the feedback from the patients. And splitting is like a classic. So splitting is when we say, oh, this person is idolizing one person and demonizing another person. It's like a form of black and white thinking. And it can absolutely cause problems. So sometimes y'all may have seen this in your family where it's like, you'll have a kid who's like, mom is the good guy and dad is the bad guy. I love everything that mom does. I hate everything that dad does. And that's not really fair. And sometimes what the kids will do is they'll like pit mom and dad against each other. Right? So this can happen and it is a problem. But part of what happens is I think some therapists get so offended and hurt by the fact that maybe there's a better therapist out there that they explain that away using splitting to preserve their own ego. So if you've got a therapist that isn't working for you, I think a conversation with them is a good place to start. But here's the key thing. Once you have a conversation with them, the question is like, how does your therapist respond to that? Are they willing to take some degree of responsibility for how the therapy is not working? Or are they going to say, yeah, the therapy isn't working because of you and you need to be different? And if your therapist acts that way, I would seriously consider finding somebody else. First time I've heard splitting, but it explains my entire childhood. Maybe we'll do a video about splitting. Because I think this is the other thing that honestly frustrates me a little bit about therapy is that at some point we started absolving ourselves of responsibility for our patients' outcomes. Right? If you look at you Google some therapist's website or you go to like Psychology Today, no one is going to talk about outcomes. They're all going to talk about what they specialize in. They don't actually talk about how good their patients are or what their patients can expect.
I've met like more and more mental health professionals by virtue of doing Healthy Gamer. And like when patients will like leave bad reviews and things like that, they'll be like, well, yeah, they wanted, the meds and I didn't want to give them the meds. So of course they're unhappy. And like, there's a lot of, you can't make everyone happy.
So can I answer this follow-up?
Yeah.
So Mr. Poopy Snail is saying, how long should I give my therapist a try if it's not working?
Yeah.
So I think that too is a good question for a therapist,
Yeah.
which it fucking frustrates me to no end that therapists
They get really offended.
Oftentimes they'll get offended, which is like, okay, so like I would talk to them and be like, okay, so I'm saying this is not really helping me very much. In what amount of time, like how long do you think it'll take us to know whether this is working or not working? Right? Like what should I expect? It's like, hey, like food delivery is coming. When is it coming? Who the fuck knows?
Okay, but don't bash therapists too much because a lot of them...
No. I like I said, so the sigh was just my frustration with some members of my profession. And I think therapy is a wonderful profession. I've had an amazing therapists mentor me and things like that. I think as a whole, like therapists are really, really good. But I do think that there's a systemic problem with the way that therapy is practiced. In that some of these like simple, like detail-oriented kind of things are ignored. So just thinking about, and this is a bias that I have, right? It's like my personal bias that influences how I practice. And in my experience, it's worked well, but there could be bias on that, right? So like some patients may not like that. I may have done some people a disservice, totally open to all that kind of stuff.
Well, I can share like my experience, right? Where I went to therapy postpartum to work through just, I don't know, adjusting to a very different life.
I gotta pee.
Yeah, go for it. Can you bring water?
Yes.
And, I saw the therapist probably for 2 or 3 months. And she was, very well regarded, one of these like Boston elite therapists. And there were a couple of things that were problematic for me. One was like explaining just cultural differences. First of all, it just took a really long time, and I felt frustrated that I had to pay hundreds of dollars for this person to just get like a baseline understanding of my life, and then for me to kind of almost convince her why things were important. I felt like that was just like a waste of time. And then understanding that, okay, you can't expect somebody to just like jump in and know everything about your life. Okay, fine. I'll spend 2 or 3 sessions setting this baseline. And then, it was kind of like, well, what's the plan here? Like, do we have a diagnosis, or is this like a 1 week, once a week forever? Like, what are we doing? How long like, what's the plan? And then it became like a question of like, well, why do you need a plan? And it's like, this isn't like a big psychological thing. I just want to know what I'm getting up into, like practically for like insurance and all the other things that you need to be able to communicate the plan, right? Like literally, how long am I blocking this time off on my schedule? Like, what are we doing? So kind of like that wishy-washy thing. And it just felt very like, well, how long can I keep you as a patient or a client? Like, I wanted to do the least, right? And she wanted me to do the most. So that tension, I think, was definitely there. And like kind of lack of a satisfactory answer there. Gave it a couple more sessions, and then I was like, I don't know how much more longer we need to do this because I don't know what we're doing here. And that might have been a failure on my part to like state a specific goal, but I don't know. That was just my personal experience where I was like, I'm a very convenient Thursday at 11 appointment for this person forever. And if I leave, then she's going to have to find another Thursday at 11, which is, you know, there's definitely a lot of people looking for therapy, but I don't know. It just didn't feel
Wait, what happened?
encouraging. This is when I went to therapy. I don't know if I've told you this. No.
I mean, and I think a big part of therapy is like if it's not working for you.
No, I didn't hate my therapist. I thought she was doing the best she could. It wasn't for me, I guess.
Yeah, I was just about that's the thing is if it's not working for you, like that doesn't mean that your therapist is bad. And it doesn't mean that the indictments of the profession of therapy that I just made apply to your therapist.
Right.
Those are just, I think that generally speaking, therapy is a weird profession because we have a trump card to discount any feedback that we're given. And we're pretty unique that way, right? Because we can explain it away like, oh, the patient couldn't handle the transference and that's why they left. It's not because I'm an asshole. They couldn't handle the transference. And we come up with this complicated language that people can't argue with us about. So we have our own jargon that explains things that our patients don't understand. And so we put them on the battlefield, and then if we blame them, we're, you know?
Right.
So I'm not saying that the majority of therapists are like that. It's just something that I've seen time and time and time again. Where it's like, wait, there were some basic mistakes that I think you made.
Well, I mean, I've tried a couple of therapists, and it's just what's the plan conversation has never gone well. Maybe I'm just bad at therapy.
No, but I mean, I think there are some, so I think like, you know, CBT therapists, I think are like more, so the therapists who are suited to the more concrete will pick a particular kind of therapy that oftentimes is more concrete. So I tend to be like pretty concrete and active.
Yeah, and I think I've like kind of heard about the way you've approached different patients, and mine just felt very, you have to trust the process, but I'm not going to tell you what the process is, but trust it, and maybe one day you'll understand. And I was like, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here for like a solution. Anyway.
Yeah. Do I think that therapy can be replaced by AI? Probably.
Whoa.
So I mean, we don't even need AI. So there's studies that show that digital CBT done without a therapist has, in some pilot studies, has comparable outcomes to working with a human being. So you don't even need AI. You just need like a course in CBT that is cognitive behavioral therapy that has comparable outcomes.
In my entrepreneurship fellow, there was this woman who had licensed the AI that NASA used to help its astronauts when they were kind of like disconnected from the world. So she was turning that into like an AI therapy thing. And if it was good enough for NASA, maybe it's good enough for everyone else. But I don't know. It's really interesting.
And you know, I know it sounds kind of weird, but I don't think that is that insane. So here's what I think. Here's one of the reasons why I think that works well, or it works as well as it does. One is that, so I think a lot of what we learn in therapy does not have to be taught in therapy. So a lot of like what you learn in therapy can be disseminated, I know it sounds kind of weird, on a scalable level. It does not require individual human interaction. And that's literally why I started streaming. Because I was like, wait a minute. Half of what I do in these appointments is like introduce people to concepts. And so I can introduce those concepts and we see it, right? We'll see like comments in Twitch chat or on subreddit or YouTube videos where it's like, I've been in therapy for 10 years and this video helped me more than 10 years of therapy. And it's like, And then like people get upset about that, right? They're like, there's no way that this person got helped more with one video than they did in 10 years of therapy. That's impossible. And then on the flip side, people are like, you know, like, there's just no way. And yet this is what the person is saying. So when someone says something like this, what do we want to do? Do we want to like listen to them? Or do we want to discount what they say because it doesn't conform with our worldview? And that's where I think a lot of like mental health, and now I think people are getting wise to this, right? So I know that there are even like the US government, and we've worked with a couple of other governments that are interested in implementing mental health curricula as part of school, which I think is excellent advice. So I think what we're learning is that, because therapy used to be the only place where you could learn this stuff. But the point is, like, it could be learned, like half of it could be learned in a classroom. So, and that's not a knock on therapy. I think therapy has discovered lots of really, really, really great stuff. And that you can learn this stuff without it. Like understanding the relationship between your thoughts, your behaviors, and your actions, which is essentially what the online CBT course helps you do, can be very helpful for people. Yeah, as far as Salt is saying, you know, and you teach us that everything we can also be a part of community, absolutely, and heal by witnessing one another and help each other too.
My eyes are getting tired.
Where's, I don't know. So I think I may have looked at it briefly, but I know that there are studies on digital CBT. And I also know that, like, when I was at Mass General, there were some primary care physicians would like prescribe it. So it had to be like through a prescription, which is weird.
Therapeutic, yeah. Well, that's why it gets covered by insurance. But the whole like mental health industry is very interesting right now, because what you're seeing is fundamentally it's a labor problem, right? Because most therapists will say that their max is about 20 hours of doing therapy a week. So they can take 20 people per therapist. And then, which is, you know, not enough. So then you have people trying to come up with solutions for non-human interventions, because there will just never be enough therapists. So then you have AI, you've got like kind of these guided worksheet kind of things. You've got meditation apps. You have like this like just hundreds and thousands of apps for mental health. But I think the problem is in my opinion, we need people. You need people. So even if it's a community online or our kind of answer to expanding the labor force was through a coaching program. And I'm really excited that the mental health industry is starting to catch on for kind of entry-level mental health professionals through coaching. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so I think, so if we think about it historically, the therapist has provided it all.
Yeah.
Right? They provided like individual human connection. They provided emotional support. They provided expertise and guidance.
Skills, training.
Knowledge. But then the question kind of becomes, well, hold on a second. Can we fraction out what a therapist provides? Can we provide content that educates people? Can we provide a community where people can feel connected and get that human connection? Does the human connection have to come from the same person that has the expertise? And that's where, if you really look at the mechanisms, and this is something that I was like super, super curious about during my training, is how does therapy work? Like fundamentally, like what are the principles? And so then once we like got into, okay, how does a human being get better? How does a human being become happy? How does a human being accomplish what they set out to do? These are the kinds of questions that I got really, really curious about. Not some like detailed thing about, you know, I wasn't like a depth person. I was like a big picture. Like, how does this stuff work? And then once we understand what the components are, we've organically evolved into a particular model. Can we break apart those components and reassemble them? Which is like literally what Healthy Gamer is. It's trying to reassemble. And there's some things that you can't replace. So I think clinical treatment is a good example of that. Where thus far, I mean, there are people who have tried and people who've claimed that they've been successful. So for example, if you look at like open dialogue in Western Lapland, which I think is in Norway, this is a group of people who use a very radical sort of almost peer support kind of method to treat acute psychosis.
Wow.
Yeah. Their studies are quite good, but there's a lot of questions about bias and reproducibility.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of like weird stuff out there where people are like really doing radical things. But I think, that's something that I think is even a bit, I'm skeptical. Open dialogue to treat acute psychosis.
This is a really interesting question, I think. I don't know how to say this name.
Barica, I think.
Oh.
Or Threerica. Are mental health services replacing what religion once used to provide for people? I think partially yes. I think so. Life guidance used to be provided through religion. So like when you lost a loved one, you used to go to a priest and they would help you through the grief. Now you can go to a therapist. And I think that too, for a while, there was a lot of contention between the priests and the therapists of the world, right? Because the therapists started getting in on
there was a lot of religious backlash against therapy.
Yeah. Right. And that's because they're encroaching on our territory. But what happened is that the priests used to do it, but they weren't necessarily the best at it. And then the therapists came along. And the priests were like, we've been doing this for longer than you have. Your newfangled ways are not as good as we are. And then they felt threatened. And now the interesting thing is we're seeing the same thing actually happen with therapy and coaching, where I see a lot of therapists are threatened by coaching.
I think it's all turf wars when you think that the customer base, for lack of a better word, is like finite. But this is such an explosively large problem that all the priests plus all the therapists could not handle the need that there is right now.
Yeah, and someone's asking about how about a priest therapist. So this is really fascinating. So I trained at this place called Massachusetts General Hospital, and for a while the chiefs of psychiatry, for a couple of I want to say 10 or 15 years, maybe even 20, there were people very high up in the department who were Catholic priests. And so I think that therapy and being a priest can combine very, very well. That's the whole thing. And I think therapy and coaching can combine really well as well. So the head of the Institute of Coaching, which is affiliated with McLean Hospital and Harvard Medical School, is a therapist. It's affiliated with the Institute of Coaching was started by one of the nation's top psychiatric hospitals. So I think the two can be very complementary. I don't think it's people feel threatened, but I think if you really look at it, much like spirituality can combine very nicely with therapy. Like these things they're not the enemies of each other. They're actually very good if we combine them all.
My coach is from the IOC, and I've gotten a lot out of that. Shall we change the subject a little bit? The women's space, the women's space, and I would love to see more women-sided content if that's possible. I would love to hop into the women's space more. Let's talk about what that means, I think, because women-sided content can mean so many different things. And one of the things I'm really proud of for Healthy Gamers, I think we do a good job of helping bridge different parts of the internet and bring people together. And I realize that different people have specific needs that they want to talk about more. So we're trying to figure out a good way to do that.
Yeah, and speaking of more women's-sided content, I would love to make more women's-sided content. There are just a couple of inherent disadvantages that I have. The first is that I feel like if I want to make if I make any piece of content, let's say, that is either neutral or male-focused, that I feel like it's a easier lift, because if it's not gender specific, then it's like easy enough. If it's male, I understand that perspective. The challenge with making female-sided content, and I'm not saying that this is just a shortcoming that I have, is I don't know what it's like to be a woman. And so anything that I make in terms of women-sided content, I have to be extra careful, right? So the shortcomings in I'm not saying careful because of offending people. I'm not worried about that. What I mean is that the shortcomings, I have to find something to substitute for personal experience. So the personal experience can fill in the gaps, but I need some way to like maintain that high level of confidence in what we're sharing that usually requires just more work, right? Which is fine. I'm not against it. But this is also where like we've talked to other people, because someone made a post about, I wish there was a female Dr. K. Honestly, I wish there was a female Dr. K too. Like I'm not.
Well, I don't want to say too much, but I think we've had so many amazing therapists reach out and offer kind of their 2 cents on what they could offer to the platform and to the community for different topics. So things like, a woman therapist coming on and talking about trauma or relationships, or a female experience of ADHD, which is becoming more and more talked about. Female-focused career advice.
We've talked about that. I was telling Kruthi that she should do a career advice stream that... So oddly enough, I think like career advice is one of the areas of women's experience that I can talk a fair amount about. I think Kruthi should talk about it. But I've worked with a lot of women and have seen firsthand the challenges that they face, or I suppose secondhand from their mouth. So like, they've explained the challenges that they face, especially in finance. I've worked with a ton of women in finance and tech. Oddly enough, that's one of the areas where I think I could make videos on or do lectures on or things like that, because I've worked with enough people and helped them through their challenges to like become they were successful before they ever met me.
I think so. Female-focused career advice, I think, is really interesting, because I found myself in business school giving a lot of it, because I would meet with a lot of women who would kind of apologize for saying, sorry, I don't want to bother you, but I just have a question, or sorry, quick question, and like kind of minimize what it is that they had to say. Even the way they sat was very like this, instead of like kind of taking up space. So I feel like I've mentored people that are kind of earlier in their careers. And when I was seeking a coach, kind of more of like an executive coach, I worked with one who was, a coach that prided herself on her ability to coach other women. And I found we were spending too much time talking about not my career, but like on, social stuff and like family stuff. And I was like, I really am wanting to talk more about my career. And so the coach that I see now is a man, and he's very like, it's career advice, not for women. It's like tailored for me specifically, but female career advice did not work for me, because I felt like I was, even early on, I don't have the most articulate way to say this, but like early on, right, when we were thinking about Healthy Gamer.
Can I give it a shot? Because I remember hearing your feedback about it.
Sure.
So I think what Kruthi disliked, if I'm remembering the right thing, is that your female coach who worked with female professionals was way too female focused as opposed to professional focused.
Right.
So she would talk to you a lot about like stuff in the house, like you're okay, like household wise.
Yeah, I felt like she was putting me in a smaller box, and I wanted to be in a bigger box. So, and I feel like that's been my experience for most things, like, women in finance or women in tech or women in healthcare. It's like a smaller space. I don't want to be just a woman in healthcare. I want to reshape healthcare. I want to reshape how we think about mental health is thought about. So I want to just be the best in mental health, not necessarily the best woman in mental health, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's challenging, right? Because this is also where people have different experiences. And for a lot of like, uh, once again, speaking from the experience of people that I've worked with, so it's not my experience, but that sometimes the challenge is I have difficulty balancing the societal demands, what society demands of a woman with my career. And sometimes it wasn't that at all. It's like, I'm actually totally fine. Like, I'm not worried about, like, people don't disrespect me at holiday parties. My parents are proud of me. My husband or fiance, like, treats me really well. Like, I'm not worried about that. My problem is that anytime I'm in a meeting with this particular colleague and I talk about something that we've done well, he one-ups me. And the moment he one-ups me, if I call attention to that in any way, shape, or form, people call me a bitch. I'm not worried about the dishes at home and changing diapers and shit like that. I want to know how to set a boundary at work in a way that doesn't make me appear to be a bitch. Because if I was a dude, I could just say particular things, which I'm not allowed to say as a woman. Because if I say them as a woman, I'm perceived as a bitch. How do I navigate that? Like, those are the kinds of issues that I think are very career focused. It has nothing to do with the uterus or like having kids or anything like that. It's that the experience of women in the workplace is different.
Yeah. My feedback is that sometimes I can be harsh, and I think that's true. I can be quite harsh, but it comes off harsher because it's coming from a woman. So that's kind of how I need to go about improving my communication style at work. Anyway.
Yeah, so in this one, Moonboggle saying competent equals B word if you're a female. So this is the other challenge. So that is true, but if you are actually a bitch at work, whether you're a man or a woman, you have to be careful because sometimes people who are competent are called bitches, but sometimes people are just bitches, right? And that doesn't mean that you're competent, or it can be in addition to being competent. So that's the real challenge. and I've seen both sides, right? Where sometimes like I'll work with someone and I'll be like, hey, like, yeah, do people incorrectly perceive you as being a bitch when you set a boundary with someone or you advocate for something strongly? Yes. And let's be honest, what you did the other day sounds like you're kind of a bitch. And they're like, yeah, I was kind of a bitch. Okay, cool. Like, so let's tease these two things apart, because as long as you mix them together, you're never going to be able to fix one. Right? Does that kind of make sense? Being called a bitch because you're competent doesn't excuse you from being a bitch in other areas as well.
Tell RTZ we say hi, Steph. Bye. We'll see you later. All right, cool. What else we got? Why do you think we shifted towards corollaries to explain things?
What does that mean?
I don't know. Yeah, and Mr. Noobsta is saying, I just don't get involved in office politics, which, like, I totally get, but to some extent that itself can be kind of limiting.
That's exactly right. So that's the challenge, is that if you step out of office politics, you may be putting yourself at a disadvantage. I'm not saying that you shouldn't step out and that it's not the right move for you, but that's what's so frustrating, is that sometimes you have to step out, like, you're like, oh, I'm just done with this crap. And then what happens is the people who are playing the political game, like, can get a leg up on you.
Have you made any videos about therapist-patient relationship and the borders between them, and how to deal with fear of the patient overstepping that border, chasing the therapist away?
From the therapist perspective? Chokes. I'm confused. Who the patient does what and the therapist does what? And are we talking about from the therapist perspective or the patient perspective?
I think the answer is no, we haven't done a video about this, but I think kind of how to get better at therapy video would be good because I've been the patient. I've been an unhappy patient. Alok has been frustrated with therapists, and he's also been on the receiving end of feedback from patients that are like, hey, this style isn't working for me, or you've had kind of directive feedback, right? What are you reacting to?
I'm reacting to this question. This is Dr. K. Does a 17-year-old female who is seeing a therapist have to have her parents sit in during the therapy session? Absolutely not.
No.
Well, depending on what country you live in, this may be different, but generally speaking, if you're 17, you are entitled to privacy as a patient. You can be pregnant as a patient, as a 17-year-old woman. You can be pregnant. You can have HIV. You can whatever stuff, and your doctor, at least in the US, is bound by law to not disclose that to your parents without your permission. You can be 9 months pregnant and ready to pop at the age of 17. And if the parent asks the therapist a question, hey, or doctor, is she pregnant? The doctor's like, sorry, I cannot answer that question for you. I know it's absurd. But yeah, you're absolutely entitled to privacy. And that's where sometimes you have to be. So this is tricky. Like, I've been in this situation before where there's a weird like power dynamic when you are a therapist that is found by a set of parents for their child because their child is a minor.
And they're paying.
Right? And so like since they like implemented, like you sort of start the relationship with the parents and then there's the relationship with the kid and like what is disclosed and not disclosed and stuff like that. So I usually approach that by being like really, really clear with the patient and being like, what part of what we discuss are you comfortable with me sharing with your parents? And usually I go through several rounds of feedback around that. I'm like, hey, I'm going to send this email. I got this email from your parents. They want an update. Are you comfortable with me sharing like this, and this? This is what I was thinking about saying. And then I'll send the email. If they're really interested in it, they can look at a draft and potentially even like offer suggestions for edits. Generally speaking, they're fine with it. And then usually what I do is I'll check in with them afterward. Hey, by the way, I sent this email. This is what I said. Do you want to read it? They're like, nah. I'm like, did it cause any problems for you with your parents? And they're like, no, it was fine. Are you okay with me do you want to be notified when I have this kind of correspondence with your parents? Or are you okay with us doing back and forth kind of on our own? And they're like, no, it's totally fine. You can do back and forth on your own. I'll be like, okay, I'll update you periodically about what I'm talking with them about. They're like, cool. Like that's honestly usually how it goes. And I've done this with like 15-year-olds. It's like, bro, your mom's asking me if you smoke pot. What do you want me to say?
You can do that?
What?
You can, I guess, yeah. You can disclose to the patient what the parent is asking.
100%.
Yeah.
There are times where, yeah, I mean.
Yeah, but I think if you're afraid of seeking therapy because that means your parents are going to learn everything, please don't delay therapy for that reason. You can have privacy in therapy and you can make sure that boundary is set from the beginning so everyone is clear that what happens between you and your therapist stays that way.
Yeah, so T Chokes is saying, I've been doing therapy 2 times a week for 10 months with a therapist right now, and 60% of the sessions are about the relationship between me and the therapist, partially because of fear of abandonment, fear of the therapist not wanting to work with me for a long time. Yeah, this is the kind of thing where it's like, I'm super confused by this, because one of 2 things is happening here. One is that you have a therapist who's injecting their own issues into the relationship, or what could be happening is that you are perceiving your issues as being injected by the therapist. So this is the kind of thing where it's like super tricky, because like I've had this happen with patients of my own where like they don't want to talk about something, but they keep bringing it up. Right? So like a simple example of this, I have no idea what your actual therapy sessions are like, so you should talk about this with your therapist for sure. But, you know, like, it's like the therapist isn't worried about abandoning you, but you keep on asking them, hey, are you worried about me abandoning you? And they're like, no, bro. But like maybe you're bringing it up in some way. Like it could be coming up because you're involved in that more so than you realize. The tricky thing is it's really hard to tell which one is it. Is this the therapist's issues or your issues? And I think the main thing is if you've been doing therapy twice a week for 10 months, if you're not satisfied with your progress, I would definitely have a conversation with the therapist and then consider seeing somebody else. Because a lot of it is also, it doesn't make them a bad therapist. It just means that it's not a good fit. Which, by the way, is another thing that therapists say to themselves to console themselves after being bad therapists.
I will say, in therapist defense, a lot of them are overworked, underpaid. They are not ever taught about the business side of what they're doing. So I saw somebody had a therapist just like suddenly raise prices on him or her. They don't know how to manage that, and it's kind of unfair. A lot of doctors, I mean, most doctors are left kind of to the wolves when it comes to managing their own career or a practice. So therapists kind of not doing their best in every session kind of makes sense when therapists are kind of already, but therapy burnout or therapist burnout is kind of a big topic in the mental health community right now, because people are so not okay right now, and therapists are basically having to pick up like what religion and family and like all these other structures we're supposed to do. Now therapists are supposed to take that place, and it's a lot, and I don't think they're not adequately supported to do that.
So there's a good question. How do you know if you're a bad therapist? Patients stop coming or don't get better? I think so it can be hard to figure out whether you're a bad therapist, but I think there are 2 or 3 really important sources of information. One, first and foremost, is your patients. And you don't have to ask them, am I a bad therapist? But I think this is like a normal part of what I think therapists should do, is have conversations with their patients about, hey, what's working for you and what's not working for you? Help me understand where you were when you started and where you are now. Do you feel like you've made progress?
I don't think a therapist should do that, because the power dynamic is so strong in that moment. I don't think it should be a conversation. I feel like a therapist like kind of doing what we do, and like here's like a post-session feedback form. What went well? What could have been better? We'll talk about your start of your next session, and like you don't have to be confrontational in that moment. I think if it's like these general things that like every restaurant is like, here's a little suggestion box if like, or you can ask to speak to the manager if something didn't go well. But most therapists don't have that feedback loop. So I think creating a feedback loop that is non-confrontational.
Yeah, so that's a great point, Kruti. So maybe some of my impressions about the quality of therapy I deliver are based on the confrontational position that I put my patients in
and
which
their ability to thrive in that moment.
Well, no, I mean, so if they can't thrive in that moment and can't tell me, hey, I think you're doing a shit job. If they're like, I don't want to hurt this guy's feelings, and they tell me, yeah, I'm doing a great job, I walk out of the office feeling like I did a great job because I put them in an uncomfortable situation where they like, it's kind of like when the waiter asks you, how was your food? And you're like, everything's great.
To be fair, you always say everything's great. Restaurants.
I've stopped doing that.
Yeah.
Right. So now
you're learning. Yeah.
Yeah. That's intent. I challenged Twitch Chat to do it, and I realized that I needed to do it myself.
Yeah. You challenged them to send their feedback, right? Next time.
No, I mean, I was just we were talking about building confidence.
Yeah.
And like becoming more socially like thickening your skin a little bit.
I'm turning him into a Karen. That's right.
A Karen in the making. No, but you don't have to be a Karen about it, right? So if someone asks you, and because here's the thing, someone asks you, hey, how was your food today? You could say, hey, this was kind of like under-seasoned. Everything else was fantastic. This the one thing was a little bit off. You don't have to be like a Karen about it.
You could come to my Karen making workshop.
Yeah, that would be, dude, I would pay money for that. Lit content. Y'all think a Karen making workshop? You think she's joking?
Oh
We went on a date. Can I tell the story?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a date. First of all,
That was a date.
Okay, that was a date.
That
Great.
was a date.
Okay,
I
all
took
right.
you to a cliff.
It was later that day.
Was that the same day?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. That was one hell of a date then.
It was a date.
Okay, so I took her to this restaurant called the Oasis, which is like on a cliff overlooking a lake at sunset. And I get a fork. And my fork is like, you know, the fork has a curve, right? The fork is flat. It's like flattened. It's not like completely flat.
This is what the fork looks like.
It's a little bit flattened. Or maybe halfway flattened. And then she's like, we need to get a new fork. And I'm like, no, I'm fine with this fork. The fork does not bother me.
That's not how the fork was. The fork had a
Tine that was out, that was a
Yeah.
different time. This was the flat fork. The tine being bent was a different time.
This was okay.
Okay? So I was okay with the fork. I was like, the fork is functional. It does the job that a fork was meant to do, which is convey a piece of an enchilada from the plate to my mouth. And yet
How are you gonna
she
scoop?
was like serious, like she was like, no, this fork is unacceptable.
I was on a date. We needed a proper fork.
If it was the first day, then I deny that it was a date. Although that was definitely a date scenario because it was like sunset and like
It was a date.
we have a conveyance, right?
Anyway, we got a new fork.
We got a new fork.
We got a new fork.
That was the moment we became a we, I suppose. It's like 8 hours.
I got a new fork, and then I had 2 forks, and he had 0 forks.
So she really can be just the K in Mrs. K's.
Be real though, am I a Karen?
No, you're not really a Karen.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Would you tell me?
Of course.
Or would you be worried that I'd ask to speak to your manager?
I'd send you the mirror. No, you're not. I think to be a Karen, you need a certain amount of like entitlement and obliviousness. I think you just have very high standards.
Yeah.
Fear of an orca planet saying Dr. K will not hold back. I won't hold back with y'all. I'm definitely holding back with this one.
So for all of you guys who are asking what's the secret to a successful relationship, that's the secret. You gotta hold back a little.
It's being therapized by Twitch once a year.
You need good forks, first of all.
Don't even get me started on the forks that we have now.
What's wrong with our forks now?
There's a functional problem which makes them harder to use than the forks that we had before.
But these are way prettier.
Have I complained?
Yes.
I have not.
There is a functional problem, I think. Could be considered as a complaint.
I'm using it as an example of the kinds of complaints I do not make.
I see what you did there.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but I haven't, you brought them. I noticed the problem right away. Every single time I try to load the dishwasher, the forks don't fit. Mm-hmm. And so they can't be dishwashed appropriately, which means that we used to have forks which would go in the dishwasher. And now we have forks that need to be cleaned more by hand.
This is still an example of a complaint that you don't have.
I have not made this complaint to you.
Okay, just making sure.
Right, I'm just pointing out that I would be justified in making a complaint
if you were to make this complaint,
I
which
also
you have not made.
which I have not made.
Right, technically.
Technically.
Right. But I have been...
In reality, I've made the complaint, but technically, I've used it. Let's be clear. I'm complaining about it now.
Yes, let's be clear. That was a complaint.
But I'm having a paper thin veil of not complaining.
Which could be pierced by a proper fork.
Yes, one of the forks that you have could pierce it very well.
Right.
Yes.
These forks are very pretty.
They are.
Okay, somebody won a ton of money. I forget who it was. Is it Elcar? Is that you?
What?
Somebody won a lot of money and has been asking for some time. Oh, we do have separate forks. Don't worry, Heart Vallets.
I still use the old forks.
He does. It was like, how do I keep my mental stability after winning a large sum of money? Okay. Somebody won a lot of money and wants to
That's
know.
not something we can answer.
We need to win some money first. All right, let me go get the forks.
You want to get the forks?
They want to see the forks.
Okay, make sure bring the little basket from the dishwasher so that we can.
No.
Oh, okay, so
You can provide your own evidence, Olive.
fork stream. Well, fork stream now apparently. She's bringing the forks. She is correct. The forks are quite attractive to look at. Let us say that. Okay, so this is my fork.
This is my fork.
And the problem is that this fits into the dishwasher. And this circle does not. So you can't put it, it doesn't sit properly in the dishwasher thing. Which means that either you can, if you don't use too many of those forks, that's fine because you can put them in the oversized slots.
You can also lift up the tab.
Yeah, but then they get all bunched together.
They're okay.
Because they're chubby on this end.
Right.
And they don't. But then you have to lift the tab.
But this fork is so flimsy. It does have good balance, though. See that?
The problem with this fork is actually I liked that these forks weren't too heavy on the back because that's another complaint I've had about forks in the past.
He has a lot of opinions about forks. He made it sound like I'm the only one that ever
Maybe I'm the Karen, Dr. Karen.
I think you are.
I could be.
You just like your forks in a very different way.
Plot twist. Dr. K is the Karen.
Yeah, seriously.
I was the Karen all along. That's what the K stands for.
Oh, no. Oh,
Jigs88 is saying first world problem, 100%.
Is it?
I mean,
yeah.
If you're complaining about something not fitting in a dishwasher, that's a first world problem.
Well, that's your complaint.
Yeah.
I just want something that's safe to eat with.
This is safe to eat with.
Yes, that is a good fork. I would not send that fork back at a restaurant.
Then why did we get new forks?
Because we needed a set. We only have 3 of these forks. The forks don't. We only have 3 of these forks. I only have 3 of these forks. So I wanted a set of forks. So now we have a set of forks. All right. We've got to move on. What's next?
I think we're done.
We're done.
I think this.
Put a fork in it.
Because stick a fork in it because it's done. If Arteezy's streaming, I think we gotta raid Arteezy. Is Artur streaming? Let's see.
Book recommendations. Can I ask how old you are, Sofan, and what kind of books you like? Oh, are we going Arteezy right now?
Well, I was just seeing if he was live, but it looks like he's live. So we can do a book recommendation.
Okay.
We really liked Column of Fire by Ken Follett recently. She's listening to Dune. I'm reading some Michael Crichton and House of Leaves. And I'm reading some Sadhguru. And I'm reading...
I'm listening to Sadhguru.
This book, which is a book on Vedic astrology. So that's what I'm reading nowadays.
Y'all really like Dune?
I love Dune.
I'm getting stuck on that same part where they're in what are they called? The Freeman's Cave? Yeah,
I thought it was the Fremen.
The Fremen, sorry.
Yeah, no spoilers. Okay. No spoilery, no.
Okay. No spoilery, no. I really doubt if you haven't read Dune yet, you're going to read it later. Okay, what are we doing, Alok?
We're going. So, hey, y'all, have a happy new year. Thanks for being a part of this in 2022. And we hope to see y'all in 2023. And we do have some stuff planned that is pretty cool and exciting. So stay tuned, everybody. Have a happy new year.
Happy New Year!
Oh no, we got to raid now.
Raid.